Hello, welcome to another episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. Hit me up on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content, the website, dsmsports.net, and of course, the podcast is available on whichever podcast platform is your favorite. Just an awesome show for you guys today. I really enjoyed this conversation and was psyched to be able to talk to him. My guest on the podcast is Chris Stone. He is the co-founder of OffBall. Really decorated background between Sports Illustrated and the LA Times, and now a co-founder of OffBall, which you're here all about. A startup in the sports media space, curating the best of content. You'll hear all about it. Really interesting to hear about their approach, why they feel there's a need for this, how they're executing across their platforms, and just a really interesting deep dive into really the evolution of sports media and why a platform like OffBall makes sense today. So here he is. Listen to a living legend. I said it in the sports media space. Chris Stone, co-founder of OffBall. I am back on the podcast with today's guest. I'm so psyched to be talking to him. He is a wealth of knowledge about this greater sports media space, doing really cool stuff now with OffBall. My guest on the podcast today is Chris Stone. He is the co-founder of OffBall. And welcome to the podcast today, Chris.
Hey, Neil, I'm excited to be here. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Really psyched to pick your brain. I've really enjoyed consuming off ball. It's one of my favorite reads every day in my inbox, my newsletter. I almost use it. I sometimes I wait till like evening because it's like a treat for me. Once I get through the day, I get to read off ball now. So really psyched to hear all about it. But before we get into the meat of our discussion, Chris, tell us about your career path, your stops along the way, and certainly what gave you guys the impetus to start off ball. Any tips for folks that want to try to work in the sports media space?
Sure. I think I knew from the age of 7, that I wanted to be in sports. I was a voracious newspaper reader. My father was in newspapers growing up, and the idea that you could turn that into a full-time career, like, is something that I really never let go of. I worked at that same newspaper that my father did for 4 summers in college. And I did go to college where we did not have a journalism major, but I knew I wanted to go in journalism. I went to Columbia right after I graduated from Columbia Journalism School, right after I graduated from Tufts. And I lucked out into a job as a fact checker at Sports Illustrated, and I stayed there for 27 years, working my way up to editor in chief.
Yeah.
And then I left in 2019 and moved to the West Coast, take a job as the sports editor of the Los Angeles Times. And I did a lot of multimedia projects with them beyond just the sports department that I really enjoyed. And in the late spring of 2024, I joined the off-ball team. I became one of 3 co-founders along with Adam Mendelson and Michaela Hammond. And that's where I find myself now, almost a year later.
And I guess we'll get into off ball more in a moment too. But just for our listeners who are not familiar, like how do you describe off ball? What's the elevator explanation?
Yeah, I mean, off-ball is digital sports platform. It is not a journalism platform per se, even though it embraces good journalism and platforms a lot of good journalism. It's really a space that sits at the center of where sports meets culture.
Yeah.
And off-ball is the opposite of on-ball. And on-ball would be the thing that we have a lot of in this world, and it's really good, right? ESPN is on ball, quarterback power rankings on ball.
Yeah.
Who won the Lakers game last night on ball? And off ball is really this growing ecosystem that is related to what's happening on the field, but is really happening away from the field, where sports is starting to intersect with the larger culture of fashion, music, streaming, tech, etc. And it's also a nod towards the way stories are being told and who tells those stories. Because when I got into the industry, this was actually pre-internet, pre-email, it was a very, relatively speaking to now, a very like narrow space, right? You had newspapers, you had magazines, you had television. Those were really kind of the big 3. And then this digital world has obviously become a lot more fragmented, and we exist to kind of bring some order to the chaos that exists in this kind of, increasingly, fragmented, segmented space.
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone is listening is not familiar, if once you go to OffBall site or go to their social platforms or check out the newsletter, you'll kind of get it pretty quickly. Like if LeBron James has a Ken doll coming out that's with his likeness, you might see that in OffBall. Or when Trini Rodman and Ben Shelton, the tennis player, like hard launched their relationship. That's not a sports story necessarily, but it is, and you might see that in OffBall. And I love that intersection in the way you put it of just sports and culture because there is so much sports in culture now, and vice versa.
Well, I didn't even get to like kind of the essence of who we are, in the sense that we are not aggregators. We are curators, and this feels like a very meta conversation to kind of. We won't have a long uh, discussion about the nuances and the difference between the two. But what we are doing is we're linking out directly to creators that we like. We curate the site, for example, the homepage twice daily. We have a daily newsletter, and that is entirely curated in the sense that at a certain time, this is what we've settled on as our update for this particular news cycle. We are not trying to keep up with the news and constantly refreshing as the afternoon goes on. What we are doing is saying, let's slow down. We have four editors who are 24/7 combing the internet so you don't have to.
Yeah.
And what they are putting up there is, in theory, what we like to think of as an all-star team of sports culture content that is being pulled from a variety of different platforms. It can be a 5,000 word story from the New Yorker, or it can be an X thread, or it can be an 8 minute YouTube story.
Yeah.
But the idea is it's designed to kind of reflect the way we increasingly consume culture. Even the most serious of my journalist friends, like they don't read 20 Washington Post stories in the course of the day, or at least use that as a discussion point to kind of discuss what interests them. A lot of it is, yeah, they read a few Washington Post stories, they read an athletic story, but a lot of the time spent, it's that moment that I describe as when you hold up your phone to like a family member, your partner, your children, a friend, and you say, "Did you see this?" And it's like something that you
Yeah.
divine from your screen. And just because it's 15 seconds and not 5,000 words doesn't mean that it doesn't have like a lot of value, that there's an act of discovery or surprise, or you feel like you're learning something in an interesting way or being entertained in a different way. It's very much a response to kind of this um kind of spiral down to like the algorithm, right?
Totally.
Algorithms are driving so many of the things that we consume in the course of the day, and in the process of searching for things, that's the most powerful tool for finding something. But they end up taking you to the same 18 or 19 stories with same 18 or 19 headlines, and often in many cases, it doesn't even take you to like the original piece of content that had people talking about it in the first place.
Yeah.
We pride ourselves on taking you directly to the primary source, to the original creator of whatever it is you're reading or listening to or viewing.
Love that. Yeah, no, I remember having a one-time guest this podcast and sports newsletter guru, I guess for lack of a better term. He probably won't like I'm calling him that. Kendall Baker used to say like when he thought about building his sports newsletters, he did it's with Sports on Earth or Sports World. I forget what the original one was called, and then Axios, and now with Yahoo. He used to say like I want the newsletter to you to read it and to know that you didn't miss anything important, that you saw everything. And so it's almost like we combed everything out there in the greater sports cultural world, and we're gonna make sure that you don't miss anything cool or miss anything that's worth turning your phone around to show somebody. And I remember even there was a time where when Snapchat was really big and a bunch of athletes were posting on Snapchat these ephemeral stories that like how are you supposed to keep up with all this when an athlete posting on Snapchat and it's like him and a person that a teammate that you didn't expect him to be with or a free agent. It's like someone has to be just tracking these snaps all day and somehow get it out there. And so the idea of like we're gonna find all the best stuff for you and make sure you get it to you feels like definitely a problem to be solved and a value to be provided.
It's interesting you mentioned Kendall because I spoke to Kendall, whose Yahoo Sports newsletter I read daily, and I like very much. We spoke a couple of weeks after OffBall launched that last fall, and that's exactly what he said. He wanted you to he wanted two things, right? He wanted to make sure you hadn't There wasn't anything that you had missed. But, to really kind of cull the really surprising, to make it feel like an act of discovery, which is becoming increasingly
Yeah.
difficult as time has gone along. We feel like we've seen everything, right? What haven't we seen? And even stories that we haven't seen or read, we tell ourselves that we had seen them or read them because we're saturated with so much content that we feel like we've seen and heard everything and what is new and what's fresh out there. I mean, there's nothing out there that Off-Ball is the only place to have seen this,
Right.
right? Even with the deep cuts, somebody has seen this, somebody has discussed this, and it's a matter of it's identifying things that 5 million people haven't already seen, and then trying to assign some cultural meaning to what it is. It's not that this happened, it's this happened, and this is why this might be interesting to you, or why you should know about this. It's trying to peek around those cultural corners and assign some framing to all of our stories. And that's something that we spend a lot of time working on and workshopping every day. It's not just saying, okay, we identified some interesting stories. But what is the broader story here? What is the through line here? What is the framing here? And that's similar to what I did at Sports Illustrated, because even Sports Illustrated was a weekly magazine. And
Yeah.
while
Into
the
that.
majority of magazines are monthly, weekly, once upon a time, was a high velocity cadence,
Mhm.
and sometime in the 1990s, especially as ESPN started to hit its peak, a weekly magazine was not such a high velocity product,
Right.
right? So you couldn't merely put together a magazine that said, this happened, this happened, this happened, this team won, this team lost, this is a star, this is no longer a star, because those are things that are table stakes for most consumers. They already knew that. So SI's, what SI had to solve for in putting out a weekly magazine was being able to package a series of stories that everybody in some form knew about, right? But giving it some sort of cultural weight or assigning it some sort of framing that somebody else hadn't thought of, taking you to a place that you hadn't already gone. And obviously that became even more difficult once the internet came along,
Right.
and that has become the great challenge for these great institutions that have been around for decades and even centuries.
No, that's a great call, and you read my mind because that's kind of where I was gonna go. Is like we're talking not too far removed from the NCAA men's basketball championship and women's for that matter. And back in the day, you would get SI the following whatever weekly cadence you would get in the. I used to read the print magazine all the time, of course, and you would get a story about the basketball championship, but it wouldn't be like a just a gamer like you might see in a newspaper the next day. It'd be a deep dive into something or some aspect that you didn't know as much about or some angle. So when you thought about like programming for SI and even taking that same I guess framework into off ball now, is it more like let's take these stories that everyone is talking about and find a different way to present them or different angles to pursue, or is it also like let's find stories that people aren't even talking about, or at least maybe that the small percentage of people are even thinking about? Like how much of it is that deeper dive into the bigger picture, the bigger stories versus the let's zig where everyone else is zagging to some degree.
Yeah, well, yes. I think everybody wants to zag where everybody else is zigging, or zigging where
Right.
everybody else is zagging. And that's certainly our objection. I mean, Sports Illustrated and Off-Ball are two very different
Totally.
products, but I will say the common denominator between the two is they are acts of curation. I mean, a magazine is the ultimate act of curation. When you put together a magazine, you are not just trying to say, hey, this is an interesting story. This is an interesting story. You're thinking about mix, you're thinking about pace. You don't want six 5,000 word stories consecutively where it kind of blurs into each other, no matter how good those stories are. I think a place like New York Magazine does this very well. I kind of hold it up as a North Star. When you go through New York Magazine or any good magazine, you feel like there's like some change of pace as you're going through it. It's like the voice feels a little bit different here, and this is a little bit more visual, and this is a little bit more text driven, and the subject it's this it is an act of curation. You're packaging something. It's almost think of it almost as like a museum exhibit. You're putting together. You're presenting something that together, like individually, is a lot different than what it is when it's part of a larger whole, if that makes any sense
Yeah.
to you. It's a collection of things, and how things mix and match with each other is really important. And I think when we think about the daily news cycle in sports and culture, we spend a lot of time using the word mix. Like, what is the best mix of stories, of tone, of voice, of subject, um, of platform, right? I said earlier, I don't want people to go to the website or newsletter and say, they just gave me five long form stories in a row, or conversely, they gave me five Instagram posts in a row.
Yeah.
You just kind of want to feel like this somewhat, hopefully, this kind of not too discordant flow, creates from like the experience as you scroll down. You say, wow, something from YouTube, something from The Athletic, something from The New Yorker. Interesting tweet thread, a really interesting 15 tweet thread that helped me tell a story far more effectively than maybe a 4,000 word story, could
Yeah.
have done. Oh, it's a link out directly to this trailer for the new Netflix documentary about the Red Sox. And then, there are some stories that we call stacks or prime time where it's basically taking one larger story and like putting the blocks together to help you tell the
Yeah.
full story. And that is probably the most enjoyable part of off ball, is not just, again, that's really like it's a puzzle. It's like it's not, here are the same five stories that are trying to illustrate this point. It's five different blocks of that story, hopefully coming from like kind of different platforms that kind of help you understand a story in a deeper, more contextual way. And that's interesting.
Yeah, no, the whole like user experience, the UX side of things is an angle that I didn't even really consider and think about of like, yes, we want to give people a diverse experience, and that might be a combination of tweet threads, of YouTube videos, of written articles, and different ways to consume content. Like when you think about like what defines success, like I guess both going back to when you were the SI and certainly today with OffBall, and I'm sure there's certainly different because very different products. Like you could do stories about whatever, name your big name athlete or someone that is really has a really polarizing or divisive or really popular, and you can just do a bunch of stories about that, as opposed to maybe saying like, well, we have a mission to try to serve and tell all the stories that are worth hearing about in our opinion. Like, are you looking at click rates, at open rates, at like the example I always go back to too often at times is when ESPN was doing a billion Tim Tebow stories every day at one point, and it's like, well, people keep clicking on it, so we're gonna keep doing it. Even if there's more important sports stories going on. So how do you kind of balance like what's sort of not clickbaity, but what's popular and what's really serving the overall mission and maybe helping you guys reach a more diverse user base? Like, how do you think about what success metrics look like for off ball and going back to how that was maybe informed through your history?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned open rates, click-through rates, traffic, data. And, data is something we pay very careful attention to, including all the aforementioned metrics. But I think the most important metric to us is engagement. Is Are you coming back tomorrow? Are you coming back the next day? Are you coming back later this afternoon? You know, repeat visitors who when they come to Offball, whether it's our newsletter or our website or our social channels, it's an intentional act. I think what's happened in the age of SEO is, and I learned this from the previous two places I lived, is the great majority of people coming to those places were coming via search, right? They were coming in through a back door, side door, and we're not coming back frequently, like we're coming back less than once a month, right?
Yeah.
A lot more than you would think. I just assume people came to Sports Illustrated, they're coming every day. They're coming multiple times a day in the way that I'm engaging with it. But they're often coming through search. And, this happens. I've had this conversation with a lot of people. Like they'll come to your place, but not even realize that they're at your place, right? They saw a headline that was interesting. They clicked on it, but they weren't necessarily stopping to say, oh, I came to this destination. The destination is almost secondarily. It's the headline or whatever trigger existed, that got you to that place as opposed to the place itself. We want people when they come to off ball, and our data shows this, is that they know they're at off ball. You
Right.
know, they know, like, they know the space that they have landed, and they are coming back tomorrow, and they are coming back the next day, and like engagement is by far the most important thing. And there's been a lot of very kind of meta media stories written about engagement and what it means. It's not like engagement is a new metric. I think, like, when I think of good engagement, I think of like The Ringer and Grantland when it was around. You were always aware that maybe they didn't have the largest audience, but they definitely had the most engaged audience. And that's a North Star for us, is like people who are intentional about engaging with us, as opposed to just really not caring who furnished this headline for
True.
them, or this piece of aggregated content.
Yeah, and like you'd rather have I'm speaking my own here, not on behalf of you, but you'd rather have 100,000 people that are coming to you every day than a million people that came to you one day, and maybe some percentage come back at a certain point. Like that sort of that more reliable, engaged, and returning person is going to be better longer term, in my opinion at least.
I think I've read a story recently. I'm pretty sure it was a story, an interview with the CRO or COO of Semaphore,
Mhm.
another very good new media platform. And she was explaining it's not the 100 million we're interested in, it's the 100 who matter, or something along the lines. I might
Yeah,
be paraphrasing her poorly. And of course, we all want 100 million, right? And we don't want just 100. But the point is pretty clear. It's like you want the right people coming for the right reasons,
yeah,
and the right people are people who want to engage with who you are and what you're delivering them, who are like very aware of the fact that I am developing a relationship with off ball, right? And that is really, really important. And I think kind of in the AI algorithmic kind of infused model, there is like this sprint to the algorithm that doesn't really matter. It's about just how your place in line,
totally.
and I'm stating something that's very basic and that's been kind of picked over and parsed plenty of times before. But, you know, that gets a little, it's not especially rewarding. I mean, we all want great scale. We want all great audiences, but we want audiences that like actually care about us.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to build that relationship to some degree. I have some definitely some tangents I want to go in there in a moment too. But I also want to discuss a little bit of like uh, I'm different. I'm not your normal sports fan. Like I will watch just about anything that's relevant in the greater sports space. I will want to consume and learn about and think about. But when I think about like building a publication, you guys have a very ambitious goal to be that center of where sports and culture intersect. And sports is covers a lot of different sports, a lot of different communities, a lot of different micro communities, a lot of different segments. So do you think about like let's bite off everything and we're gonna try to cover as much as we can in the greater sports universe? Or like, do you think about like let's pick off a little bit at a time? Like we're gonna look at some of the underserved sports, or some of the fans that are more sticky in these platforms, or some of the fans that are more likely to consume this content. Like let's start with basketball or college or women's soccer, whatever it might be. Like, how do you think about that from a coverage and content perspective, as well as a platform growth perspective?
Well, you don't want to spread yourself too wide, I think, because there's nobody on this planet. And I would throw even ESPN here who can be everything to everybody. ESPN is probably the closest thing there is to being
Trying to be.
everything
Yep.
for everybody. So we kind of picked this space, which, while vast, is also somewhat concentrated. And that is like the intersection of sports and culture. We've already kind of separated ourselves, going back to what we discussed earlier in the discussion about like what's on ball and what's off ball. And
Hmm.
on ball is well served by a lot of great places out there. The Ringer, ESPN, The Athletic, an increasing number of Substacks, an increasing number of very good social media accounts. And they don't need another person out there to they don't need us. And this isn't, our mission is not to kind of inform you on who should win the NBA MVP
Mhm.
this year. But off ball is, again, it's like what off ball is like is somewhat debatable. Like what is off the field and what's on the field. We have this
Yeah.
debate with a lot of our story choices. Even tonight, for example, like our big story on the site right now is Luka is coming back to Dallas
Mhm.
tonight. On the one hand, that's a very big basketball story because it's the greatest trade of all time, but like its impact on a fan base, the impact on like Dallas basketball culture, you know, that's
Yeah.
an off-ball story,
Totally.
and the fan experience and how it's deteriorated in Dallas since the trade, you know. But even then, like we did this as one of the aforementioned stats, right? A series of stories telling a larger story.
Yeah.
And one of the stories we put in there actually was an ESPN story, a very good ESPN story about like what the 28 other teams could have offered to get Luca. That
Mhm.
is a classic on-ball story, right? It's very in the weeds. It's like it's a great Zach Lowe podcast, for example, or
Yeah.
let's use an ESPN personality, Tim McMahon, Brian Windhorst. Um, but I think the way it works with kind of the larger conversation around Luca coming back to Dallas is even if you're not a big sports fan, you can kind of appreciate the place of that story, this larger story
Yeah.
that you are trying to tell. So off-ball is already like it's distancing itself a little bit from like the everyday who won, who lost, who's great, who's not.
Totally.
And but at the same time, it's not an untapped space, but we would argue it's an undertapped space that gives us like a little bit of a white space to like traffic in sports. Like we're not necessarily saying, hey, we want to give this sport more attention because it seems like people like know less about it than they do, say, the WNBA or the NBA or the NFL.
Yeah.
Is it an interesting story that kind of helps you understand which way the sports which way sports culture is headed directionally? And, is it helping you understand, like, is it like where this fits into kind of like the broader sports culture? And the thing about the underserved sports is you often find things in it that are like really interesting things that say a lot about broader sports culture. So that's why we might, there's a lot more opportunity to go deep there because so few people have gone deep on it. But we're not just trying to seek something out because it's obscure, we're not trying to see obscure out for obscurity's sake.
Totally. And you're starting to see, like, to some degree, that sports teams who are trying to recruit more and more fans and build that denominator as much as they can are kind of starting from the outside in as opposed to the inside out. Like they're creating content about their players interested in fashion or music or food, and they're doing the little mini mic like what's your favorite movie or like stuff like that that's going to appeal, especially with these like for you algorithms on TikTok and Instagram that is not necessarily just being served to a quote unquote sports fan base. It's being served to a much broader audience that the teams hope will eventually get them to drive more interest or some brand affinity or some affinity with the athletes that'll get them into their greater ecosystem. And so, like, I mean, you guys probably see it every day with your curators who are searching across all these platforms to find these more diverse stories that are more off ball, that are less about X's and O's and who won and lost last night, but more about what's going on in the greater cultural space or what's the kind of stuff that even non-sports fans would be interested in. Like are you seeing that it's that's just like the direction that a lot of teams are going, even to some degree the sports media brands, like what where do you see kind of the, I guess, the tide shifting in terms of what content's being produced by the teams themselves who are serving their fans but serving a much broader base as well?
Yeah, what's the saying? Riches and niches. It's and you're seeing this a little bit in Substack, a lot of it in Substack, I would argue, where you're just seeing a lot of really interesting voices that are kind of recognized. Can I drill down on something that might be able to find an audience and not try to be everything to everyone? I mean, there's so much good storytelling that's coming out of Substack these days. Two of my favorites, for example, are this woman, Madeline Hill, writes a subset called Impersonal Foul, and she also has a very good podcast with Charlotte Wilder called the Sports Gossip Show.
Mhm.
Um, and David Skilling has a subset called Culture of Sport. But even some people who are stars in kind of legacy media have kind of built out this, Mark Stein and Jake Fisher
Yeah.
have created like an essential NBA platform, as as far as I'm concerned. Jeff Pearlman, my old um, colleague at Sports Illustrated and friend, has created, well, he's created like a lot of different spaces, but
Yeah.
I just think about like how he created this TikTok platform that
Totally.
went from 0 to 250,000 like overnight. And it's just saying, I'm going to create a lane for myself. And because it's kind of hard to be the New York Times in 2025, you
Totally.
know, it's hard to be Sports Illustrated in 2000 in 2025, but like good, well, for one, there's more sports storytelling than there's ever been, which has which is there's more good sports storytelling than there's ever been, I would argue. It's just a little bit different. And the conversely, there's more bad sports storytelling than there's ever been as kind of as a function of volume. But we exist because somebody has to like jump in there and find the good stuff, right? When we started off ball, the idea here would start from this very basic premise. Like we just wanted to help people find good stuff because we ourselves were spending so much time, like we're self-curators, right? And I realized this, sometime before I came to off-ball, like one of the things that this kind of aha moment I had when I was thinking about like joining off-ball was, well, I've already kind of been doing this on my own, and I wish somebody would do it for me, because every day it's like you're looking for good stuff. How do you find good stuff? Who's going to surprise you, anymore? And it's like that act of kind of self-curation just was like, you know what? This is actually this can help solve a problem that exists in media. And I'm doing it in a space that I care deeply about and have spent more than 3 decades in.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about like the old days of like Feedly and RSS readers or whatever, using Twitter as a way to like, oh, someone will tweet all the best stuff at me, so I'll find it somehow, and having that way to find stuff. I mean, I think about
Well,
myself.
well, you basically said something that is like people are correct when they say, "Oh, so you're trying to recreate Web 1.0." Well, yeah, but I guess in a 3.0 way, but that is something that has been lost. And listen, there's no shortage of terabytes that have been expended on this subject, of like what happened to that old community of bloggers and people we met on Twitter and developed relationships or social media more broadly. It's like it's still all out there, Maybe there's even more of it than there's ever been, but it's just so hard to kind of plow through it and sift through it, and that's what we kind of recognized as an opportunity when we
Yeah.
started off ball.
So a few more minutes left here with Chris Stone, co-founder of OffBall. I want to touch on because you've touched on you mentioned Substack and newsletters in general in multiple cases, as well as just the idea of having a relationship with OffBall, the brand itself. So when you think about the, I guess, present as well as the future, and I know you guys already have like you have a sister relationship, or I don't know how you characterize exactly with like Sportsverse and the author of that newsletter. So do you think about like developing these relationships with individuals? And we want people to know who our writers are by name. And yes, Offball is the umbrella brand, or is it more like we want Offball to be the person, the entity with which you have a relationship? So like, how do you think about that in terms of present and future for the brand?
Yeah, I think it's more of the former.
Mhm.
When we launched off ball, we were effectively saying, "Oh, we have this great staff. It's called the sports internet." And they don't know that they're staffers here, but as time's gone on, in their own sort of way, have kind of recognized what we were trying to say, that the internet is our staff, and that we are trying to build a community of people who contribute not only to kind of give us a heads up that they have something interesting coming along that we can platform when it's ready to drop, but also maybe becoming part of a larger community that's creating new storytelling formats, that are creating new ways of telling stories, and where we work with them to create new original content experiences. And that's the next phase of Offball, is like original content. And that doesn't mean we're going to create like a quarterly magazine or something like that. But
Yeah,
are there?
the mini Q&As and stuff have been really, really enjoyable.
Well, sure, it can be bite-sized snackable stuff like that, or it can be something more ambitious where we can create, say, curated events, for example, where we're,
Yeah.
or, you know, this isn't it, but it's a little bit of a tangent here, digression, where I want to talk about, like, I saw something that June Lee, very talented young journalist who's been with ESPN, he's been with The Ringer, he's been with Bleacher Report, created his own YouTube channel this week. Maybe it was last week, but his first official uh, piece went up this week, and it was he gets in a batting cage against Adam Ottavino,
Hmm.
who's a major league pitcher, with a virtually unhittable pitch, this sweeper. And that unto itself is um, interesting unto itself, right? Oh yeah, you're going to hit against a major league pitcher, but he uses that as a vehicle to kind of tell a larger story about how we just don't appreciate like just how good these guys are. Even something of a journeyman, this is my characterization of Adam Ottavino, not June's, of a journeyman reliever. And it becomes a larger discussion about how that lack of appreciation of what goes into being a major leaguer leads to kind of our hot take culture. There's probably a more eloquent way I could have kind of
Yeah.
described all that. But that's interesting storytelling to me. And that's like the type of storytelling to aspire to. And it feels very original. YouTube hardly original, as a platform. It's one of the most engaged with platforms on the planet. But like there are still people out there who have this belief that you can tell stories in new, interesting ways that kind of value quality and thought, and they can still be interesting, and you can still have a real sense of discovery coming out of them, as opposed to this culture that is, again, what I referred to earlier, where you end up at a site you don't even know you're there, and you're there for 14 seconds and you may never come to that site again. You just
Yeah.
wanted the headline, you wanted the click. So that's going to be a crucial part of, like, I'm not saying we're going to replicate what June's doing. I'm using it as an example of like trying to find new ways of telling stories. And we will probably find old ways of telling stories too, but we're not going to try to recreate Sports Illustrated 2010 here.
Yeah, no, I love that. Like, it might be easy for whatever, my boomer parents to to dismiss, like, oh, like TikTok is empty calories, or this is that, and it's all different forms of storytelling in rich ways that can be a 50-second video, it can be a 5,000 word article, it can, and I love just the dedication to like sort of innovating and thinking about what can we do that's next, and like you said, some legacy stuff as well, in terms of how content is packaged, how we tell stories, and how we help people find stories. So I love it.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up, like, it's, like our parents' generation, for example. My father's 82 years old, and like he spent his entire time in media. He's a serious reader, and I think he remains like a serious reader. But so much of what he passes on, like he spends more time with his phone in his hand than anybody I know,
Mhm.
scrolling, and it was kind of this revelatory moment for me. Like, yeah, my father, who reads everything, also is that same person holding up the phone and
Yeah,
saying, "Hey, Shinny, my mom, look at this. Did you see this?" And sharing things with me from various social media platforms. And my father's no outlier here, I mean,
yeah,
like, we spend most of our time obsessing around, you know. Gen Z and Gen Alpha and even millennials and their relationship with screens, but the relationship with screens is universal. And I think there's an opportunity out there to kind of like, that's what we're curating basically. The idea that like the way people are engaging, with storytelling is, yeah, a lot of it is screen driven. That's not like a generational thing,
Yeah.
but at the same time, also realizing like in the end, we just want to show you things that are hopefully that are hopefully interesting, tell an interesting story and not get so caught up in the platform or whether, this is at odds with some of the more traditional canons of journalism, but it's an act of discovery for us too.
No, hell yeah. Oh, one more thing is that shareable stat. I could seriously pick your brain all day on this stuff, Chris. I want to touch just briefly on what it's been like. I mean, growing a platform from scratch. Like, where do you start, and at what has been sort of the best growth mechanisms for you guys? Like, where are sports fans coming from? Where are fans coming from? What's helped drive some of those spikes? Like, I mean, it's intimidating just to think about like starting from zero in 2025. What's it been like, and where have you guys seen successes?
Yeah, starting from zero is something because, when I got to Sports Illustrated in 1992, like I said before, there was no internet, but we were starting at 3.2 million magazines. That's quite an audience.
Oh yeah.
And then when SI did, in time developed into kind of an eight-figure, following, online. Um, so I think the scariest part of it is like it's really hard to topple, of an institution that has 70 years of history, for example, or like other media institutions that have even older histories. I don't think you ever, well, I should be careful what I say about this, but I think you really stop and think about it, there's not that same concern that you have in a startup, like what tomorrow looks like or next
Yeah.
week looks
Yeah.
like. And as excited as we are about the future, I think with any startup, like, and this is what, really drives us is the fact that like even like a day where it's like, well, this wasn't the greatest day for whatever reason, you feel like a Jenga piece has been kind of pulled out a little bit, and you just have far more existential conversations about because you are starting something from scratch and something from new. And qualitative measures, aren't necessary. You're creating a good product, which we are very confident that we're doing. But that in itself is not a guarantee that we will exist in a year or 2 years, and one thing that we did have a little bit of a benefit from, the three founders here, me, Michaela, and Adam, we have a vast network of people that we know, who are happy, who like what we're doing, who are happy to support what we're doing. We have a really strong team of 9 people, who really do a really good job of evangelizing who we are and why we exist and why you might like off ball. And so, we started from zero, but it wasn't like uppercase zero, it
Right.
was it was like lowercase zero. So, when we started, like we did last summer of 2024, we spent a lot of time simulating. We did about 3 months of simulation before we launched, where daily we would create pretty much the product that you see now, even though it looked much different at the beginning. Um, and we acted as if there were 100 million people looking at us the next day, even though we were doing it for like a beta group of like 100,
Yeah.
right? A little bit more than 100, but 150. But we treated it like very seriously because like when we actually hit go on the franchise in early September, like we couldn't afford to make mistakes and say, okay, let's try to figure it out now. I mean, obviously there's things we're figuring out and learning every day about it, but when we launched in September, we felt like we had a lot of command on it because of like the work we had put in the prior 3 months. And, especially in the first couple of months, we still make mistakes, but some of the things we were doing back then, it's like, I'm glad we learned this now. And we really leaned on that beta audience, which became a larger beta audience as the summer went on, to kind of be really candid with us about, and that was invaluable. We really listened to like this kind of tight community of readers that fundamentally overhauled the original product.
Wow.
You know, I mean, starting with the design of the product, the design that you see now that we're very proud of, that was created by a really talented studio in Bushwick in Brooklyn called All Right Studio. Um, they did an amazing job because we pivoted from something that felt a little too familiar in design and sensibility to something that felt a little bit fresher and not overstimulating in the way that so many like websites and digital products are. And we did the same thing with the newsletter for the last 6 to 8 weeks before we launched. Just like we ruthlessly tested it every day, and as if it was going in front of the eyeballs of a lot of people. And we interrogated each other, we challenged each other in ways that was like when you'd stop and think about it, it's like, we're in like a beta phase and sending this out to 100 people. We're taking this awfully seriously. Well, we were taking it awfully seriously, and we were better served for it by the time we launched in September of 24.
Well, I love hearing the story. It's super cool to see where you guys have come from and where you guys started. And there's like 10 or 12 more questions I was going to ask you, but we'll have some more fun with our quick hitter segment coming up. But first episode of Cerebral Stat coming at you right now. Really good stuff. Being able to talk to Chris Stone, co-founder of OffBall. Stick around because we're gonna have some more fun with them with our quick hitting question segment. But first episode's shareable stat. And simple shareable stat is kind of related to this continuing to emerge generative AI space and how it's affecting user behaviors overall. And it came from a recent statement put out or part of a testimony, I believe, by Apple's Eddie Q. And he noted that for the first time in 22 years, Google search queries on the Safari, mobile Safari, browser on most iPhones, the Google searches have actually gone down for the first time in 22 years. It's been up, up, and up for 22 years, and for the first time, it is down. Most of the reasoning or the at least guesses, the educated guesses for why it's gone down is the increased behavior around generative AI and going to ChatGPT, going to Google Gemini, or whichever Gen AI bot or agent or solution is your preference. But it's an interesting behavior to consider about what it means for the future of search. In the future of how people are getting information and getting knowledge. That applies to not just sports, but any industry. And I'm not here to offer any solutions necessarily. There's plenty of people more qualified than me to say, focus more on having content that's informative out there on Reddit or YouTube, or to have more people talking to these publications that may be picked up by these AI platforms that have deals in place. But I think the main thing to take away from that is to understand how your brand, whether it's a team, a league, a brand, whatever it is, how it's really working today, and to keep up with how it's working in the future when it comes to these platforms. What are some of those common fan or customer questions, and how is a ChatGPT answering that question right now? Is the answer that is it accurate? Is it the answer you want them to have? Is there a better way to make sure the proper answer is put in there? How else would the common fan behaviors work with these platforms right now? And how are you keeping track of that? Do an audit of all these platforms. Look at and certainly continue to be proactive when it comes to listening on looking at what people are saying about your brand and the fan experience and the overall customer experience on platforms like Reddit, on TikTok, on YouTube, where a lot of these searches are now starting. Whether they're searching less in Google or they're searching more within Gen AI platforms, the fact is behaviors are changing as this episode of Shareable Stat shows. So that's episode of Shareable Stat. I won't ramble on about it too much, but think about it, ponder it, and again, it is 22 years. It has been 22 years since in 22 years the Apple's or Google searches on Apple's Safari browser on the iPhone devices has never gone down, but after 22 years it has gone down for the first time ever, and that says a lot about where consumer behavior is going. So that's a Cerebral Stat, but more importantly, stick around for more good stuff with Chris Stone of OffBall. I am back on the podcast with today's guest, Chris Stone, co-founder of OffBall. Chris, you crushed it in your interview. Are you now ready for some quick hitters?
Let's do it.
All right, number one. Going back to your time at SI, I have a two-parter here, but a quick two-parter. Your favorite story published during your time at SI, and your favorite SI cover or covers of all time.
My favorite story is a 2017 story, I believe, that was written by Ben Ryder about the life of Hideki Arabu, not long after, well, actually, it was about 6 years after he died by suicide. And curiously, nobody had really kind of plumbed that story because so much time had been um, you know, dedicated to Arabu's career when he first came over here. He was like a tabloid fixture all those years, and then he passed away, and the story just kind of evaporated into the ether. And Ben came back to it 6 years later, and not only told the kind of the basic story of like his his life arc, during his career and post career, but he managed to kind of tie it together to this kind of eternal search that he had had, like looking for something else in his life, and one thing in particular being his father, who he had never known until much later in his life. But I think it's like the example. It's not the most famous story in
Mhm.
SI history, but I do think it is um, just taking a story and a difficult story. It's an easy story to tell poorly, but to kind of tie together all these different vectors the way that Ben did, it's like I still hold it up as a story that I share when I'm speaking to journalism classes, including one that I spoke to as recently as 8 days ago, where we actually workshopped this story. That wasn't really a quick hitter. You want quick hitters, and I
Uh,
just talked for
well,
about
that
three
was
minutes
great.
there.
Tell you, for the quick hitter, then tell me the SI cover that you most love.
I'm realizing I should have prepped for this
No
a little bit. I
worries.
would
We can
say
do the quick, whatever pops in your head.
um, this Monet Davis cover in 2014 when she was pitching for in the Little League World Series. And it's just a beautiful photo of her kind of mid pitch. She's kind of about, I think she's kind of getting close to her release point as but it's just a beautiful photo about a story that was like kind of a once in a lifetime story at the time that just kind of came out of nowhere. It's a story that you're not preparing for, and then when it comes along, and then the photographer, in this case, his name was Al Tealman's, just he got the perfect picture.
Yeah, that is a great one. And there's just obviously so many covers. So that's certainly one I can close my eyes and picture it right now. Number two for you, Chris. Tell me, excluding any former employers or SILA times, whatever, the media business that has most impressed you and why?
I'm such a stand for like New York Magazine because they've kind of taken something that's existed for a long time and consistently made it interesting and then created a bunch of um kind of subcultures or subproducts, like Vulture, The Cut, Intelligencer, which almost feel like if they stood on their own as products, they would be these
Totally.
immensely influential, thoughtful, surprising. I talked early in the podcast about peeking around corners, and I don't think anybody peeks around corners quite like New York. I'm a little partial because I also lived in New York for 30 years, so maybe. But I think it's the type of magazine or the type of publication that kind works even if you don't live in New York,
Yeah,
because I think it's created a generation of done a great job creating a generation of very kind of New York culture curious,
totally.
readers.
No, I love that. That's a good one. If I ever see a link from one of those publications in my Sunday long read newsletter, I will always click on it and enjoy it. So definitely agree with that one. All right, number three, this would be a quick one for you, Chris. Tell me the most memorable sports game you've ever attended.
Oh, easy. 1994 Game 7, Rangers Canucks. Um, It was the Rangers hadn't won Stanley Cup since 1940, so I think it was like 54 years at that time. The Rangers are going up 3-1 in that series.
Yeah,
They lost at home game 5, very surprising. And then they lost game 6 on the road. And they come back and to New York on this sweltering day. I mean, this was not hockey weather. This was well into June in 94. temperature like on game day was in the 90s, and they won the cup. I'm not a New York fan. My teams are from Boston, right? But I was in the building that night seeing like history, like a type of history that you can appreciate no matter how much you might not care for like that city's sports teams, And I just remember afterwards, like leaving at 3 in the morning, you kind of expect, oh, we're going to walk outside and it's going to be dangerous, right? People are still celebrating. It gets a little too loose, and it was it was graveyard silent, except there was like Mike Francesa walking down the street by himself, just whistling. And I just wish we had camera phones at that time because it was like the perfect clip for the moment. But anyways,
Oh, that's awesome. Just goosebumps hearing you tell that. And yeah, I'm certainly the Mark Messier guarantee and all that. One of the best stories in New York sports for sure. Number four for you, you mentioned New York Magazine, but I want to go back to the emerging and sports media or media business. So or it doesn't have to be sports, any sort of emerging media business that's caught your eye and why.
there are two, and I'm going to start with one that started a little bit longer. It's a platform called Sportsish, and it's started by this woman Lily Checketts, and it's most visible on its as an Instagram platform, but I just randomly I very organically came to it. And it was just over time, I understood what she was trying to create. She was trying to create a space for other women that wasn't, I think we just kind of put like women's sports fans, female sports fans in a box and
Yeah.
just say, women's sports fans, they're over here. And they only care about women's sports. But she was saying, no, women care about all sports, and she kind of tells the sports stories in a very accessible way, but it's not condescending at all. It's fun, it's lively, it's an incredible Instagram thing. She has an incredible Instagram account, a newsletter. It's like I was so impressed by it. Like I like independently just found a way to kind of reach out to her and say, someday OffBall would love to partner with you because of what
Wow.
you're creating. And we have done some collabs with her, but I'm just impressed not only by the content she puts out, but also by the fact why she started it and what she is trying to create. And the second one that really impresses me, I've already mentioned it, it's like not even a week old. I think what June Lee is creating on his YouTube show is going to be really interesting. I went into a detailed explanation earlier why I about the latest video that he put out, but like he's motivated by the same things that Offball is. Like he's motivated by like there's still so much to love and celebrate about sports, and why aren't we going immersing ourselves more in this and telling stories that are worth telling, in deeper, more immersive ways. He's
Yeah.
like he as he came back to sports after really kind of having been away from it for a couple of years, he just realized there's still so much to celebrate here. And I guess I'm at that phase in my life where I kind of want to be a little bit more of a sports fan, because I've spent so much time in this kind of professionalized environment, which I absolutely loved, but you always kind of keeping like your fandom in check, and I think I like the idea of being able to create something that is sophisticated and interesting and entertaining and deep, even, you know,
Yeah.
that still celebrates like why I got into this industry in the first place.
Love it. I am going to YouTube as soon as we're done, and I'm gonna check out Julie and subscribe because loving that for sure. All right, getting down the wire here with Chris Stone of Offball. Tell me, number five, your favorite story or piece of content that your team has produced at Offball so far. What's one that just stuck with you or caught your eye and be like, this is great.
Well, I mean, because we are a curation platform, it's
Right.
kind of hard to say,
Pick
hey,
one
here's like
like
a story, this amazing story or this 6-minute video that our video or social team created. But I will say it was you asked me what success looked like, and it's like when this team of editors identifies something in the culture that feels like, aha, somebody else is going to see this and this is going to catch on a little
yeah.
bit. And they during the simulation phase of this and even the early days of launch, they were very early on a couple of things that just kind of told me, wow, these are some really sharp knives here. One being that the idea that the NFL is coming for all the culture. I think that's one of the great underrated stories of the last year. We have this picture of the NFL as this vast military industrial complex that's
Yeah.
relatively humor, but still the most humorless. The but it's the most popular. That is just wrong. It's the most popular league in North America. It's this cultural colossus. But they also started to say, you know what? We want we want to own Christmas. We want to be on the runways at Paris Fashion Week or Milan or New York Fashion Week. And there's this kind of broader visibility of the NFL and kind of the wider culture that's kind of quietly and less quietly in more recent months taken place. But the team saw that coming. The team saw Netflix coming, where it's like, you know what, in 2025, we're going to talk, we're not going to be we're just gonna kind of shrug our shoulders every time Netflix drops a new like documentary trailer, because it's almost like it's gonna be happening on a daily basis. Well, a year ago it wasn't. We were wondering to what extent Netflix wanted to get involved at all,
Yeah.
with sports, and it would be these a la carte, these one-offs. And in fact, like, is there a day that really goes by where we feel like there's not like a new Netflix
Seriously.
documentary that's dropping. The Boston Red Sox have not one good Netflix documentary
Yeah.
that dropped this year. They're gonna have two, and I'm a Red Sox fan, so I'm a little partial towards it. But um and to me, like that's examples of like when they framed that up the way they did at the time and as it appeared in our newsletter, that was like those are like kind of the proud moments, right?
Cool.
It's like you looked around that corner and you saw this coming, and it might seem like what's the big deal? Like, the NFL, yeah, they're everywhere now, or Netflix, they're everywhere. But if you knew when it was said and when it was platformed by this team, a year ago, you would say, well, that's pretty impressive.
No, for sure. That's a really interesting way to think about what you guys do at Offball too, is that the ability to pattern match and trend spot. And as you curate every day, things start to come together and coalesce. And you're like, oh, there's a lot of this happening, and there's something bigger happening here. Which I love that opportunity, that aspect. All right, number six for you. This would be a really interesting, maybe a tough one as well. Can't say anyone you're related to. So tell me the writer or sports writer you most loved to read growing up, or early in your career,
Ear- Early in my career, so it can't
or
be.
growing up as a kid, even, or whatever, early in your life, or you can do one of each.
Okay, we can do early in my career. It was definitely like Peter Gammons for me
Yeah.
growing up. Like as a Red Sox fan, as somebody who viewed the Boston Globe Sunday sports section as like a miracle, with these incredibly long, sometimes two full page notes columns in the pre-internet era. Um, it was definitely Peter Gammons. I mean, we used to share Peter Gammons like. We literally like ripped out the columns
Yeah.
and handed them to other people and shared them. When I was in college, we would, Sunday Globe sports section theft was probably the most, was the leading source of crime at Tufts, like in the late 1980s. So Peter Gammons then, um, and to work with. Yeah, I don't want to separate.
Right.
People who work with me, they probably know the answer, but I don't want to.
No, I almost was gonna make you
We
do like,
can end it at Gammons when I was a kid because yeah, that's indisputable. Pretty much anybody who wrote that Globe section qualified.
I was almost gonna make you do like a Mount Rushmore of SI writers of all time, but not gonna make you do that. So
I
Gammon,
will say the person I do enjoy reading now that I will actually kind of call out, shout out is Louisa Thomas, who writes for the New Yorker and who I wasn't even aware of Louisa's writing until Grantland came around. And but I think what I'm really especially impressed by with Louisa is like she's a sports writer for the New Yorker. And she
Mhm.
has to write on a regular cadence, which means anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week. There aren't a lot of people who write 1 to 3 sports columns a week anymore. And she mixes in some really very good long form stories as well. But and I enjoy listening to the Press Box
Yeah.
podcast. One of your competitors.
I love what Brian Curse does, and we take a different angle for sure, but some good calls there. Love it. I wanted to work for ESPN back in the day too, just so I could say this is Peter Gammons ESPN. I want to say this is Neil Horowitz ESPN. So I love all his answers. All right, number seven for you. Tell me the number one tip you give to students or young professionals trying to make a career in sports media.
How about two quick ones? One is, just kind of it was a good piece of advice like that was given to me when I was very young is like trust trust yourself. Like, trust um, you know, trust everything from your word choices to your instincts to and don't try to create yourself in the image of somebody else, and
Yeah.
secondarily is don't underrate just like it's a much different media environment that you'd be walking into in 2025 than I was when I walked in 1992. But I do think there are a lot more, you can enter this profession at a young age where like what you said, your ideas are a little bit more valued than they would have been 30 years ago when media, not wrongly, kind of thought it had most of the answers. Media worked right then,
Yeah.
right? It seemed incredibly stable. It didn't seem like it was going away anytime soon. And now I just think, just especially with kind of like when you're young, you belong to a different, more digitally literate generation, and there's just your bosses are they want to know a lot more about what you think about things than they did
Yeah.
35 years ago.
That's a couple of great call outs there. Like no one's better at being you than you, and take advantage of the fact that you know what the kids are into because you are a kid at times. Like that's an awesome couple of pieces of advice there. All right, number eight, it's time for our food question. Always got our food question for you, Chris. Tell me the best meal to get in New York and where to get it, and also since you've been in LA for a little bit now, the best meal to get in LA and where to get it.
Well, I don't really like I live in LA now, and I don't really leave my little like bubble here where I live. I live in the South Bay, so I'm somewhat limited there. But I say this to people whenever I ask. There's a little place called the 900 Club in Manhattan Beach where you would never think that somebody would say the best food that you've had here is the 900 Club, but to me, it's the 900 Club. It's incredible. Um, New York. Geez, I really should have prepped for this, right? I just haven't eaten in New York in so long. Um,
What do you miss most from not being able to get out there?
what do I miss most about New York?
Yeah, the food wise, like miss the bagels, the pizza, the pasta.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered my question for me. I miss the bagels and the pizza. It's just like there are a lot of things in LA that are superior to New York. Mexican donuts. Uh, but yes, I do miss bagels and pizzas. We're not completely barren of the two things out here, but I do have to get in the car for a fairly lengthy ride for both of those things.
We're getting better. All right, I will mark that as a passing grade for the best meals question. It's always a favorite on this podcast. Come down to the end here. Tell me number nine, the sport whose stock you'd most want to invest in for the next 10 years and why. So what sport is a good one to buy and hold for the next 10 years?
I think I'm just trying to like be make a headline here by saying track. I really like where track is going because, and that's probably not the answer that you would give to your stock picker, but we're on a podcast and I can answer it however I want it. So I'm gonna say, I really found myself kind of excited by seeing like what went on with the Grand Slam of track last week, and the idea that track, which is an incredibly dynamic sport to follow, but we only follow it once every 4 years during the Summer Olympics, is now finding a way to kind of fill in the space in between. And there's some really good publications out there, like Sitius Mag, which was co-founded by Chris Chavez, an old colleague of mine at Sports Illustrated. You know, great charismatic personalities, and
Yeah.
just like a great race is like, I don't know what, like watching a great like track race. So like I don't know if that it has an analog, but it's just um track.
I don't mind that answer. I mean, it has the ingredients for what should do well. It's very focused on individuals. It is very amenable to quick highlights and quick clips that you can catch on social media, and it plays internationally. You don't have to be from the like American football might be hard to get overseas in terms of like, understanding the rules, or cricket or rugby, whatever. But track is whoever finishes first, that's who wins, and it's easy to understand.
It's and it should work, right? Because it's short bursts, right? And we live in like a short burst culture. So
Totally.
why
Has
not
to be.
track?
All right, this one might be the toughest one we're gonna end on. I'll try to ramble a little bit so you have some time to think about it. The most famous athlete in 10 years will be who? So 10 years just enough where this athlete will probably be playing now, could go across sports. It could be for reasons beyond sports even. The most famous athlete in 10 years will be blank.
Lamine Yamal. And I say
Oh,
this as somebody who is not a like obsessive soccer fan, but certainly somebody who appreciates soccer. I mean, he's 17 years old right now. And just because of the power, the global power of soccer, I almost feel like you have to pick somebody from soccer, but charismatic, young, fun, with the right team, surrounded by the right team, but the right man for the right age, you know? My second answer would have been Bronny James. Um, you said most famous, right?
shit.
Um, but Lamine Yamal, that's my
Good
answer.
one. I like it. Someone's gonna take the mantle from Cristiano Ronaldo and Leo Messi, and who knows, like Vinicius Jr. These guys as they age up. And Lamine Yamal is a great answer there. I wasn't expecting. All right, Chris, you kicked ass in your quick hitters. Now your chance to take over the podcast and tell us your social media all-star follow. It can be someone on social, it could be a newsletter, it could be a podcaster, it could be whatever it is. Tell us who they are and why they're worth following.
Oh, okay. So, like social media, Twitter in particular, Mina Kimes, who's pulled off the incredible trick of being very out there and not letting everything else that's out there like kind of take away some of that joy and like accessible intellect that she brings to, everything that she says. She's incredibly funny. Podcasts. I'm a big Bomani Jones fan because I think Bomani Jones is like the great framer of sports debate. There's plenty of sports debate out there, and there's plenty of people who are loud debaters and even loud good debaters. You can probably guess who I'm talking about, but like somebody who is very smart but doesn't try to get too smart with it. I mean, it's just like every time I listen to his podcast, I'm like, I just really hadn't thought about it that way, and that's the space I'm in now, right? Where we're trying to frame things in interesting ways. And it's this very natural gift that he has.
Love those answers for sure. And the second Yale alumnus we've had mentioned too between Ben Ryder and Mina Kimes. So go Eli's.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I just put that together. Yeah.
And how about you, Chris? Where we can find you, as well as all the places that we can find Off-Ball across digital social.
Very easy place. Off-ball news. We have a triangle. But right now we have the triangle that will grow into something else. But right now is the triangle we built to kind of build our credibility in the space, our authority in space, the permission to like try new, bigger, and better things in the future. And that is our website, which is offball.news. You can reach us on Offball on every social channel that you like, and our excellent Ashton Battuso authored newsletter, which you can sign up for free simply by going to the Offball news site or Google it. But those are the three primary places that you can find us right now. We don't think it's a huge imposition on your time. We think it's a worthwhile imposition on your time. So.
Check it out. As I mentioned, it's one of my favorites, and as someone who's chronically online like me, who feels like they're on top of every sports news story and sports content, I find stuff in Offball all the time. And I'm like, I did not see that. How did I miss that? And it's just such a welcome thing. So I appreciate what you and your team are doing.
And I should say one thing because you are giving me a platform here to say it. I'm sure you've inferred this already, but this, what we are putting together, like when you go to the newsletter, the website, or social, this is not Chris Stone posting these things. You know, this is
Right.
a great team of really super smart uh, people that include Kelly McLaughlin, Brady Crotwell, Terrence Scott, the aforementioned. Um, the aforementioned Ashton Battuso, Olivia Withright, Mason Bergen. Like, you gave me this platform, thank you. But it would be like remiss where if I didn't go into my kind of semi-Oscar speech here, where I thank the people who really make this thing hum.
It's great stuff. You have a great team there, and really appreciate you coming on the podcast today with us, Chris.
Really love being here. Thanks, Neil.
So much fun being able to chat with Chris Stone, the co-founder of OffBall. Just really cool hearing about everything they have going on, about why it matters, and certainly learning from someone with such a decorated past and such good insight into the space, where it's been, where it is now, and where it's going in the future. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening and downloading. As always, I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. Hit me up on Twitter, NGH287. Also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. The website, dsmsports.net. Their website, offball.news. In case I didn't tell you already, make sure, check out their platforms, subscribe to them. Check out my platforms as well, of course, and subscribe to the podcast. And whichever podcast platform is your preferred one, you will find this podcast there with all the episodes going back almost 12 years. But until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off, the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.